Hi everyone. This is on the ACCA Advanced Audit Assurance exam brief. So this is applicable for the December 18 exams. So as all of you know that the exam format has changed somewhat, and the changes are um, quite significant. So this brief is to provide you some update and to let you know what the changes and what to watch for. Okay, hi, I'm Rodicha. Thank you for watching. Okay, so firstly, some things to cover. Our main thing is to talk. My main purpose here is to discuss about the exam format, what are some of the common topics, core topics, and common issues, and finally, the last part is the strategy to passing. Okay, the exam format is very different from the previous one. So if you had taken the previous format and you're redoing the exams, you need to be watchful regarding the new format. For those of you who are doing this for the first time, it's very important to take note that the new exam format do not allow for any options. So all questions that you find in the exam paper would be compulsory. They will be compulsory. Okay, section A is a 50-mark case study question, while section B is uh, comprising of a shorter question 2 and a question 3, and each of them 25 marks each. Now, question 1 covers a case study, a relatively long one, with a lot more details, whereas the questions in 2 and 3 comes with very short scenario-based questions. You'll be given a short scenario, not very long, typically about half a page, right, or so. The topics that will tend to be tested in question 2 and 3 will be usually things like quality control, the FRS, ethics, and especially the audit opinion and report. Now you may see some other topics as well in section B. Okay, the core topics have not really changed much from the previous exam format. Audit risk is a very important core topic. Now if you have seen the sample paper before, or if you have seen the recent September paper, the topic of audit risk, and in some cases depending on exams, it may be tested as risk of material misstatements. That particular one question takes up as much as 20 over marks to 24 marks. So it's one topic which you cannot avoid. It's a regular feature in exams. The other topic, which is business risk, occurs on a somewhat periodic basis. It may occur or it may not occur at all. Following that is ethics and ethical threats and safeguards. According to the recent examiner's report, uh, apparently the topic of ethics, ethical threats, and safeguards will be regularly tested. So it is worthwhile to invest time to make sure that you fully understand how to identify the ethical threats, which is in fact a very simple topic, and then suggest the appropriate safeguards. And examiner report has often pointed out that students suggest safeguards that are not appropriate regarding the ethical threats identified. Okay, and a commonly highlighted area is the FRS or the IAS, depending on where you are taking this from. Now, very importantly, the FRS uses elements from the SBR, if not the P2 paper, depending on when you took the paper, right? Now, the FRS is an important core area. Typically, the FRS that gets tested will be like revenue, leases, and then stuff like inventory, provision, contingent liabilities, and not forgetting impairment. In some cases, you even see stuff like asset available for sale, right? Revaluation. So those are all very commonly tested FRS. You need to familiarize yourself. You can expect anything like 10 to 20% being allocated to FRS. I repeat again, anything like 10 to 20%, right? Depending, right? And I don't think that is a conservative estimate anyway. It could be higher. You can expect a much heavier allocation on knowledge of FRS. Okay, the audit report and opinions tend to be a badly attempted area, and in the new syllabus, or rather the new exam format, the audit report and opinions, which previously was optional topic, will obviously be compulsory. So you cannot avoid not attempting the audit report and opinions topic. You must be familiar with this. Now, From my previous students' comments, the audit report and opinions topic can be rather easy. So you just have to make sure that you get yourself to understand about when a qualified opinion is applicable, when is an adverse opinion applicable. Make sure they are familiar with the differences in the different types of opinions. They're not that difficult. It's just getting used to like why is an opinion more applicable than another. Okay, as for the audit report, typical things that I can foresee would be like the key audit matters, emphasis of matters, which are required, right? And it is also not surprising that students tend to confuse the KM and the EOM. You need to make sure that you are absolutely familiar with the differences in the two. Quality control, also a regularly tested topic, followed by evidence and procedures. Evidence and procedures are also regularly tested topic. You can expect procedures to be a regular feature, right? Do not cut corners and skip this, right? It is unwise. And interestingly, in the recent exam papers, September 18, the topic of group audit appeared, right? So you should be advised not to try to spot the topics, but and at least ensure that the core topics are covered, such as these that I've listed. Now, they are not listed in any order of importance, right? So you should make sure that these are all given similar priorities. Okay, got the common issues. So, where I teach this, especially with the mock exams that that we give the students. Interestingly, and not surprisingly, these problems recur all the time, and this is quite consistent with the examiner's report. A common issue that I found among students is the inability to identify audit risk or the risk of material misstatement, especially for question 1. Now, it is very unfortunate because the audit risk and risk of material misstatements are very repetitive, and they just appear in different forms, but they're the same. Now, how would you know if something is an audit risk or risk of material misstatement? It's quite simple. Are you able to identify if it has an impact on expense or revenue in the statement of profit or loss? Are you able to identify if there is any impact on assets and liabilities or equity in the statement of financial position? Are you able to identify if there is an impact on disclosure? If you can, it probably means that that item is a potential audit risk because of the potential impact. Okay, and following which, also a frequent question that a student asks would be like, what happens if I can't identify whether there's an impact on statement of profit or loss, statement of financial position, or disclosure? If I can't identify an impact on these, then what does it mean? Now, then in that case, the likelihood is that it may be a business risk, right? And business risk would typically be those where you can't really identify, or rather, such business risks would be those arising from running the business. Take for instance, if you run a grocery store, then the typical business risk would be the risk of e-commerce, for example, taking away some of the sales. Other business risks could be like, for instance, a business such as a transportation company, right? The business risk would be the government changing the law and making it difficult for the business to operate, right? Stuff like that. So you need to practice these to make sure that you're very clear about the difference between business risk and audit risk. In fact, not listed here is the inability to differentiate between business risk and audit risk, and confusing the two. Now that can be quite damaging to your ability to score. Now the following item, lack of in-depth explanation. Now I see this all the time, and unfortunately it happens so often that I don't think there is any thing wrong not trying to emphasize this further. I have like at this point in time, now this is the month of October, I've came across student answers where the explanation for the audit risk or the business risk is so inadequate that there is no opportunity to score marks because it's so poorly explained. Okay, and a discussion on the risk identified. You can't just have 3 lines, or 3 sentences and expect the examiner to understand what risk you're trying to explain. Now, one way to determine if you have an in-depth explanation is, ask your friend to have a read at what you have written. If your friend can't understand what you're trying to explain, there's a high chance that it's just not adequate, it's just not good enough, right? So I came across lots of these, right? I'll emphasize to you, this can be a potential cause for failing the exams, a potential contributor to scoring badly and even failing the exams. Okay, third, the inability to apply the relevant FRS. I can't think of any very prominent example offhand, but one of the very good examples would be like, for example, say provision. Now, certain things like, say for instance, the company sells goods, and these goods come with warranty. So therefore, the applicable FRS concern is provision, right? Because there is a present obligation that and it is probable, and there can be a reliable measurement. So therefore, a provision uh, need to be related to in your explanation regarding the audit risk, okay, or the risk of material misstatement. Okay, so provision is a commonly tested one. The other is impairment. Now, although in the exams it's not likely that you'll be asked to perform an impairment test, but you need to be able to explain it. Right, so this comes to my following point: the inability to apply the current FRS or current up-to-date FRS, like for example impairment. You need to be able to understand how does the impairment test work, where impairment test works by is performed by taking the testing for like the lower of the carrying amount or the recoverable amount, and where the recoverable amount is the higher of fair value less cost of disposal and value in use. So what is value in use? Value in use is present value of cash flows. You need to know details like this, although the computation is unlikely to be required. Okay, I'm not saying totally not required, but unlikely to be required. So you need to know the mechanism in order to be able to get through the explanation, and especially later on I'll talk about this, that is suggesting the appropriate audit procedures and if not the appropriate audit evidence. Now, it's very unfortunate that in exams, I think even for my the cohort of students that I've taught before and still teaching, that there will always be students who do not comply with instructions, especially questions stating that you should or you're recommended to apply analytical procedures. Now, you know what? Where you see the question having these 2 words, analytical procedure, especially in question 1, you should take that as you need to perform certain ratio calculations, but do not attempt to calculate all of the ratios, like 10 or 20 ratios. That won't work. Work towards at least 5 of the ratios where you have time to explain in detail. Now, not all ratios require an explanation or evaluation, right? So certain ratios, like for example gross profit margin, where you find that the difference between one year and another year, where you realize that the difference is significant, like for instance the gross profit margin in year 1 is 20%, but in year 2 is 40%. Now that calls for an in-depth discussion, like could this be due to misstatement of the cost of goods sold? Could it be due to wrong classification of expenses? Right. Now, where you find that the revenues have fluctuated by 1% from one year to another, you don't really have to explain that because there is not much fluctuation to discuss about. Right? There is unlikely to be any audit risk with a 1% fluctuation in revenue, for instance. However, you know what? If you were to find that revenues have fluctuated by 20%, for instance, maybe a 20% increase, but cost of goods sold increased by maybe 60%. Now then you have to explain, you need to evaluate. So the analytical procedure is actually not very difficult. There is a bit of common sense to apply, right? Something like that varied by 0.5% one year to another year obviously wouldn't justify in-depth explanation and evaluation. That's very important, right? And this was mentioned in the examiner's report. You need to read that too. But of course, if you're concerned about this, you can drop me an email, right? Or you can approach me in school if you see me. Question 2 and 3. Okay, failing to address the ethical threats appropriately with suitable safeguards. Now I must emphasize that uh, question 2 and 3 not only has these, but question 2 and 3 has far more issues. I couldn't find enough to list. I couldn't find enough space to list out all of these. There are a lot of issues. Okay, but let me just tell you some of them offhand. One which is very prominent is failing to address the ethical threats appropriately with suitable safeguards. For example, uh, an advocacy threat is so serious that you can't have any safeguards like rotation. That won't work. Or for instance, independent EQCR, that wouldn't work too, right? Basically, an advocacy threat can only be mitigated by declining the assignment from the client. Or, you know, an advocacy threat can appear in many forms, so it doesn't have to be advocacy threat from due to client requesting the auditor to represent them regarding a taxation dispute or legal dispute. Right? It may take place in many forms. Yeah. So other things would be like, for instance, you need to you need to also further watch for things such as the FRS. FRS is frequently tested in question 2 and 3, and not forgetting another is the audit opinion and audit report. Those are going to be tested, so you need to prepare for these. Okay, I didn't list them out here, right? But they will be expected to be tested. Quality control, uh, professional skepticism, and what else? Stuff like, for instance, quality of audit evidence, sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence. Those are expected to occur in question 2 and 3. Right, so I like to add again once more, you need to practice the past questions to get a good grasp of question 2 and 3. Okay, but I can't really emphasize enough about the need to practice. Other general issues, poor writing skills. There are, for a professional level paper and equivalent to a master's degree level paper, writing skills are absolutely necessary. You can't avoid that. Now you can have short sentences, but you can't have point form. And if you do point form writing, you will surely be penalized. And point form writing is just not clear and in-depth enough. Now, general issues, and I think this applies right across question 1, 2, and 3, is the lack of in-depth understanding of the FRS requirements. You can't pass the exams without knowing your FRS. Right? Obvious ones that have been highlighted by the examiner would be like the revenue and the leases. You need to revise these as thoroughly as you can. Now, there are very good examples of these two topics being tested. The last few sittings have observed revenue being tested again and again. Okay, failing to differentiate the different audit opinions and commenting on the sample audit opinion. So it is not uncommon for the question to feature a sample of an audit opinion or even a sample of the audit report, and you'll be asked to comment on the appropriateness of the audit opinion and even the audit report. So you have to actually practice it. There is no shortcut to this. You need to practice that. Okay, so but since this is a brief, I'm not going to go more in depth on this. Right, the past 1 year and 2 years of exam papers are very good references for the way how the examiner has tested audit opinions and audit report. Passing strategies. I always recommend this to all students. In fact, whether you come from my class or some other class, some other school, doesn't matter. Right. The key thing to success in this paper is that you shouldn't practice anything less than 3 to 5 years of passing exam papers. Right. So that is to make sure that you do not miss any of those obscure topics. Some obscure topics like, for instance, CSR, corporate social responsibility, reporting of those, for instance, social reporting, other information, right, and even due diligence. So those tend to be a bit not so regularly recurring, but if you practice 3 to 5 years, you more or less would have observed all the different styles, patterns in which these topics are tested. Review your FRS that they have covered in the earlier part of your SBR and P2 studies. Ensure that the appropriate content is covered in your answers. Now, it's unfortunate that in the question, given the limited amount of time, it's rather easy to miss having certain key content inside your answers, and that can be very damaging to the ability to get a good score. Finally, I'd like to emphasize again, right, there is no substitute for regular practices. Considering that now you have roughly about, from now, today is the 20th of October, to the commencement of the exams, that's roughly about 4 to 5 weeks. So you should actually plan to complete at least 3 to 5 years of past year exam papers. If you have attended my class, then you have already attempted quite a number of the audit risk questions. So those of you who came from my class, you should make it a point to revisit the questions that we attempted on audit risk and business risk. I'd like to add that the business risk is a potential likely topic for the coming December 2018 exam. So that shouldn't be neglected, and you can easily get a good 8 to 10 marks from business risk. And combined with with the audit risk topic or question, that easily gives you about 30 marks in the exams, right? Before I end off, I like to emphasize, with good writing skills, that also enables you to score this very important professional marks, which is 4 marks, right? So all these are very important, and they all add up, in small ways, contributing to a 15% pass grade. I have students who have scored 46, 44 marks previously. So it shows the importance of making sure that all grounds are covered so that you do not fall under that 44, 46 mark range, which is I think is quite unnecessary. Alright, so with that, I come to the end of my exam brief. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to present more. I'm going to cover a bit more on the different questions, especially on how to identify the audit risk and business risk. So thank you for watching, and if you want to, you can share this video with your friends. Unfortunately, the time that I have is very limited. I'll be inviting some of you who are from my class to come down to discuss your mock exams. So your mock exam results will be coming soon, and we'll discuss them. And finally, don't forget, if you have submitted your mock exam papers to me, make sure that you have indicated email address, if possible your WeChat ID, so that I'm able to reach out to you and arrange for you to come down to school so that we can discuss your shortcomings. Right. So let's work towards success, and I look forward to catching up with you all during the mock review. Right. Do not forget to come to school for the last lesson. Thank you.